Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the next session of the last lap revision series by CLAT Possible. Today, we have one of those fascinating topics. That's the theme of space and beyond. So, this is something that's going to cover the NISAR mission, the PROBA mission, the Gaganyaan missions, the basics of ISRO, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's going to be a vitally important session. As you know, ISRO usually remains at the forefront of space exploration in the world, and that is why there's usually a lot of updates relating to India as well whenever we are covering space news. So without further ado, let's make a start. So I thought we'll begin with the basics of ISRO. I hope it's visible to you on the screen. So this year actually began with very important news on the new chairman of ISRO. Who is that? This is V. Narayanan. Okay, V. Narayanan was appointed this year as the chairman of the Indian Space Research Organization. Okay, now let's do a little bit of background, then I'll tell you. Actually, the ISRO chairman occupies several other positions ex officio. Okay, so let's make a start. Now, what do you have to know? The precursor of ISRO was INCOSPAR, or the Indian National Committee for Space Research. Okay, now in this form, this body got established in 1962, at that time under the Atomic Energy Commission. But right from the start, this body was led by Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. He is somebody we call the father of the Indian space program. Now, over time, as ISRO's functions expanded, it was established as a separate organization on Independence Day of 1969 with its headquarters at Bangalore. Even now, who do we call the first chairman of ISRO? It will be Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. And due to his foundational role at the beginning, we also call him the father of the Indian space program. Okay. Now, what I've mentioned here, this is something we'll cover in a future slide as well. VSSC, which is one of the foremost space centers of ISRO, is actually named after Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. This is the Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, which is located in Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. Okay, so just keep that in mind. We have a separate slide on the important centers of ISRO. Okay, next I've mentioned here the longest serving chairman of ISRO was Dr. Satish Dhawan, and our prime launch site, which is the SDSC, the Satish Dhawan Space Center in Sriharikota, off the coast of the state of Andhra Pradesh. This is actually named after the longest serving chair of ISRO, Dr. Satish Dhawan. Okay, now if you see here, the second last point is important. You can be asked the same question in several different ways. So if you're asked the secretary of the Department of Space, or if you're asked the chairman of the Indian Space Research Organization, or you're asked the chairman of the Space Commission, the answers to all three will be the same. All of these offices are held by the same person. And right now, who is it? V. Narayan. Okay. Finally, remember, there is no ministry called the Ministry of Space. In fact, it functions simply as a department. Okay, so it's called the Department of Space. And who is the person who serves as the minister in charge of the Department of Space? It is always the Prime Minister. So that right now it will be Narendra Modi. So this has been true right since Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister. Both the departments of space as well as atomic energy are always held by the Prime Minister himself or herself. Okay, so I hope all of these details are clear. The latest chair as part of the current affairs, the precursor of ISRO, INCOSPAR, which was established in 1962 and was chaired by Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. ISRO in its modern form gets established on Independence Day 1969 with its headquarters at Bangalore. The first chair is Vikram Sarabhai, after whom the VSSC is named in Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. Okay, that's why we also call him the father of the Indian space program. And the longest serving chair of ISRO was Satish Dhawan. And after him, India's primary launch site, the Satish Dhawan Space Center, is named in Sriharikota. Finally, I told you all three offices, Secretary of the Department of Space, Chairman of the Space Commission, as well as Chairman of ISRO. All three offices are held by the same person, and right now that is Mr. V. Narayan. Finally, who is the minister responsible for the Department of Space? That is always the Prime Minister. Let's now go on to our next slide. So what I've done here is mentioned all of the important centers and related organizations for ISRO. Okay, so at the top is something we've already done, the Vikram Sarabhai Space Center. This is located in Thiruvananthapuram in Kerala. Okay, next, Satish Dhawan Space Center, which is at Sriharikota, Andhra Pradesh. Now, what I've mentioned here as the third launch pad, this is something important because this year the cabinet approved a third launch pad and said that a third launch pad should be created at the Satish Dhawan Space Center. Okay, remember, in India, as of now, there are only 2 launch sites. Okay, what are they? One is Satish Dhawan Space Center at Sriharikota. This is where almost all of our launches take place from. And there is also a launch site at Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, but that is not so frequently used. Okay, so the top 2 space centers of ISRO are mentioned at the top here. Next, we have the Space Applications Center, SAC. This is actually headquartered in Ahmedabad. Okay, the other body which I have mentioned was established in 2020. It's called InSpace, the Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. Okay, the Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center, or InSpace. This was actually established in 2020, and right now the chairman is Pawan Goyal. So remember, both Space Application Center and InSpace, both are located in the city of Ahmedabad. Now, what is the job of InSpace? This body was set up in 2020 by the government. It's a body related to ISRO. And what is its job? Its job is to promote private companies who work in the field of space. Okay, so what it does is collaborates with private industry when it comes to space flight. Okay, and this is the body through which ISRO collaborates with private industry. Okay, the next 2 which I have mentioned are located in Bangalore. One is the Human Space Flight Center. Now, why is this important? Because Gaganyaan is perpetually in the news these days. There are preparatory missions which have happened throughout this year, and the news about Shubhanshu Shukla as well, right? So the Human Space Flight Center is the one which is supposed to coordinate the Gaganyaan mission. So that's located in Bangalore, right where ISRO's headquarters also is. Additionally, one more center you should know about, that's the U.R. Rao Satellite Center, or URSC. This is also located in Bangalore. This is the primary institute or the primary center of ISRO, which specifically works on the development and advancement of satellites. Okay. Now, the last 2 are also in Bangalore, but I've mentioned them separately because they're sort of a separate category in themselves. Why is that? Because both of these, the last 2 which are mentioned here, the Antrix Corporation as well as New Space India Limited. Now, these are companies which are owned by the government, right? So think of situations where technology developed for the space program is useful for other civilian purposes. Or think about a private company or a foreign country wanting to launch a satellite, right? So ISRO does those things for a fee a lot of times. And for that, the vehicles through which that happens, number one, the Antrix Corporation, and number two, New Space India Limited, or NSIL. So that covers the important space centers of ISRO, the VSSC in Thiruvananthapuram, the SDSC, India's primary launch site in Sriharikota, an important current affairs in 2025, the third launch pad at Satish Dhawan Space Center has been approved. Next, I told you that the SAC and InSpace are both located in Ahmedabad. Finally, the Human Spaceflight Center, the UR Rao Satellite Center, Antrix Corporation, the New Space India Limited, the Department of Space, as well as ISRO, are all headquartered and located in the city of Bengaluru in Karnataka. Remember, this has been the case right from ISRO's establishment on Independence Day, 1969. Okay, so I hope all of these details are clear. Let's now go on to the next one. Now, this is something that is vitally important. It's been in the news, and that is 50 years of Aryabhatta. Now, I am not sure how clearly you can see the background, but you can see here it says 2 rupees. Okay. In fact, I discovered today that the 2 rupee notes actually have a picture of Aryabhatta on the back. Okay. So Aryabhatta, of course, was a famous mathematician and astronomer from the Gupta era. Okay. After whom India's first satellite was named. And it's been 50 years since the successful launch of India's first satellite called Aryabhatta. Okay. So let me take you through the history a little bit. In terms of ISRO, what do you have to know about the records? The first ever rocket that we launched happened in 1963 from the Thumba Equatorial Rocket Launching Station, which is located at the Vikram Sarabhai Space Center in Kerala. This was a Nike Apache sounding rocket. So that's all you need to know about this. After this, we directly come to the most important, because 2025 is celebrating 50 years of Aryabhatta. So Aryabhatta was indigenously built, meaning built in India, made in India, developed in India, but it was foreign launched. Okay, so though we made the satellite, it was launched by a vehicle made by the USSR called the Cosmos 3M. So take a note of the date here. It was 19th of April, 1975, when Aryabhatta was originally launched. Okay, so if you are ever asked what is the name of India's first satellite, we will certainly say Aryabhatta. Okay, but for your information, I've also mentioned here Rohini 1. This was India's first satellite, which was both built and launched by India. So just keep that in mind. Finally, I've mentioned on the second last point, India's first satellite launch vehicle, or India's first space launch vehicle. That was called very simply SLV, or Satellite Launch Vehicle. Over time, of course, there have been several iterations and several developments. So I'll just take you through the full forms of these. So SLV, the original one, Satellite Launch Vehicle, this is no longer used. Then PSLV, this is still used for some missions, the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle. Then we have the GSLV, the Geosynchronous or Geostationary Satellite Launch Vehicle. Okay, usually we will say geosynchronous. Okay, then there is the LVM3, and finally the NGLV. Okay, now NGLV is something that is not yet being used. Okay, the others, remember, SLV is now phased out. PSLV, GSLV, LVM3, these are still in use, and NGLV is the launch vehicle which is under development. However, remember, it's been approved by the Union Cabinet. Okay, The full form is the next generation launch vehicle. Okay, it's called the next generation launch vehicle. This is going to be the next iteration in India's space launch vehicle development. Okay, so please keep in mind these full forms. Okay, so I hope this is clear. So what's the current affairs topic? 50 years of Aryabhatta, which is India's first indigenously developed satellite, though it was launched by USSR aboard Cosmos 3M. Okay, so I hope this is absolutely clear. Let's now move on to the next. I just wanted to quickly go through the YAN missions of India. This is not an official title. It's just YAN basically translates to vehicle, right? So you already know about Chandrayaan. So Chandra is the moon. So the Chandrayaan 1, 2, and 3 were all lunar missions or moon missions. Then we had Mangalyaan. Mangal translates to Mars. MOM is the Mars Orbiter mission, right? So the first mission was that. This was on Mars, and related to this, you should know who is considered the rocket woman of India. That is Ritu Karidhar. Okay, she's from Lucknow, and her contributions to rocket development and launch vehicle development were significant. Okay, so please keep those things in mind. As you know, we also had Mangalyaan 2. Next, Gaganyaan, which is planned and work on it is ongoing. What is the objective of Gaganyaan? It is a human spaceflight mission. And finally, one which is still being planned is Shukrayaan, which is a proposed mission to the planet Venus. Okay, so I just want you to be clear about which planets all of these are related to. We will do a little bit more related to Chandrayaan 3 when we do the observances. As you know, the National Space Day is something that is significantly linked with Chandrayaan 3 and the soft landing achieved by the Vikram lander on that mission. Okay, let's now go ahead. Yes, so let's begin with Gaganyaan. Okay, this is something that is vital, something which is in the news. Actually, most of India's news items on space this year have somehow or the other being associated with Gaganyaan. Okay, so as I already said, it is India's human spaceflight mission. So what's the objective? To put humans in space aboard Indian vehicles, right? Next, please keep this in mind. Who is it that directs the human spaceflight program or Gaganyaan? So right now, the person who is the director of the human spaceflight program, his name is Imtiaz Ali Khan. Okay. Now, next, as you know, different countries give different names for astronauts. So the US calls them astronauts. So does most of the West. Russia calls its astronauts cosmonauts. China calls its astronauts taikonauts. Okay. And finally, we have India. So India is still thinking about what we will finally call them. So both of these names have come up. They've been reported. One is Gagannaut after Gaganyaan, and one is Vyomnaut. Okay. So both of these have been proposed. So let's see what is chosen. For your purpose, you can pick them based on the options you get. Okay. So India's astronauts will be called Vyomnauts or Gaganyaan. Now remember, for Gaganyaan, four Indian astronauts have already been picked, right? Who are these people who are going to finally go on the crewed mission of Gaganyaan in the future? They are Group Captain Prashant Balakrishnan Nair, Group Captain Ajit Krishnan, Group Captain Angad Pratap, and Wing Commander Shubhanshu Shukla. Okay, so these are the four people who have been selected by ISRO to be part of the crewed Gaganyaan missions, to become the first Indians to go into space on board an Indian vehicle. Remember, till date, who was the first Indian to go into space? It was Rakesh Sharma. but he went on board a USSR space vehicle called Soyuz P-11. Then Shubhanshu Shukla became the second Indian to go into space. Okay, he went on Axiom mission 4. These are things we'll cover in the next few slides. Okay, but now the objective of Gaganyaan, India's human spaceflight program, is to send Indians into space on board Indian vehicles. Okay, so moving on, there are 5 planned missions under Gaganyaan, and the first one is scheduled to be done in December of 2025. Okay, so the first step is we are going to send a half humanoid or gynoid robot whose name is Vyom Mitra, or friend in the sky, right? So G1 or Gaganyaan 1 at the end of this year, in December, in next month, possibly around your exam, we are going to send this robot called Vyom Mitra. So this is a test mission. Then after that, we are going to do further tests, G2 and G3. They will be uncrewed. And finally, we will have G4 and G5, or Gaganyaan 4 and 5, which will be the crewed missions under Gaganyaan. That is, these 4 Gagannauts or Vyomnauts are going to be sent into space aboard Indian launch vehicle. Okay, what is the objective? Not to go to the moon or any other planet. The objective is to go into orbit around the Earth. Okay, so till date, India has not sent human beings into space on its own vehicles. Okay, that is what is sought to be rectified by the Gaganyaan missions. Okay, so I hope this is clear. Let's now go on to Axiom 4 and Shubhanshu Shukla. Okay, and through it, we'll also, of course, revise Rakesh Sharma. Okay, now let's begin with Axiom 4 though. Now, this is also something that has basically been in preparation for the Gaganyaan missions. So, one of the 4 planned Vyomnauts or Gagannauts, that is Shubhanshu Shukla, he is also from Lucknow actually. He went on this mission named Axiom 4. What was the mission? To go on to the International Space Station. Okay, we'll do a little bit in detail about the International Space Station. Okay, what it is, when it was launched and stuff like that. But the objective of Axiom Mission 4 was to take these 4 people, Peggy Whitson, Shubhanshu Shukla, Stevos Uznansky, Wisniewski, and Tibor Kapi. Okay, so these 4 individuals were to be taken to the International Space Station on Axiom Mission 4. Okay, now remember, where was it launched from? The Kennedy Space Center in Florida in the United States. In fact, if you see, most NASA launches actually take place from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Now, which rocket took this vehicle into space? It was SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. And what was that craft in which these 4 astronauts went? It was the Crew Dragon Grace spacecraft. Okay, so what are the details? The name of the mission, Axiom 4. Where did they have to go? The International Space Station. Where did it launch from? The Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Which rocket? SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. What was the spacecraft called? Crew Dragon Grace. And the 4 people who were taken, including Peggy Whitson and Shubhanshu Shukla. Okay, linked to this, let's just be clear. Shubhanshu Shukla has become the second Indian to go into space after Captain Rakesh Sharma. Okay, and he has also become the first Indian to go to the International Space Station. Okay, so these are 2 records which have been made by Shubhanshu Shukla through Axiom Mission 4. Okay, so I hope all of this is clear. I don't want you to have any confusion. There are other people such as Kalpana Chawla or Sunita Williams who are of Indian origin, though not Indian citizens. Okay, they are people who have gone into space, usually representing NASA. Okay, which is why we say Shubhanshu is the second Indian citizen to go into space and the first Indian citizen to go on the International Space Station. So I don't want there to be any confusion, and so I am clarifying. Let's now come to the next one, just as I mentioned Sunita Williams. So these two astronauts, Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore, as you know, they were stuck in space for a long time. Okay, where were they stuck? Once again, they were stuck at the International Space Station. So originally the plan was to go to the ISS in June 25 for 1 week. As you know, they ended up being stuck in space for almost 2/3 of an year. Okay, now what happened? The Boeing Starliner faced some problems. Okay, so this is the craft they were supposed to return on, but this faced certain issues, and so their return was delayed. How did they finally come back? They finally came back on SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft. Okay, so in total they spent 286 days in space. Okay, now through all of this, Sunita Williams ended up creating a few records because of these unexpected circumstances. So she became the person who has done the most spacewalk time, of course, amongst females. Okay, so she is the person having done a spacewalk for the longest total cumulative period of time among female astronauts. Okay, also she served as the first female commander of the International Space Station, because she ended up having to serve that role because she was stuck on the ISS for 286 days. And finally, obviously, she has become the person to have done the longest unscheduled stay in space. Okay, so all of these three records have ended up being made by Sunita Williams due to her and Butch Wilmore getting stuck in space. Okay, so I hope these details are clear. Let's now move on to the next. Again, this is something that is important from the perspective of India's future Gaganyaan mission, right? So this is the SpaceX mission. Okay, so what did it stand for? The Space Docking Experiment, or SpaceX. Okay, now how was it launched? It was launched on PSLV C60. So the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle C60. What do you have to remember about this? You have to know the full form of SpaceX, the Space Docking Experiment, launched on PSLV C60. Now, what did it do? It had two satellites in this mission, SDX-01, which was the chaser, and SDX-02, which was the target. Through this mission, there was also a test of the launch vehicle itself, which was called POEM-4, the PSLV Orbital Experimental Module 4. Okay, so this was again part of the SpaceX mission. Okay, moving on, the docking mechanism. Now, what is docking, right? So, suppose there's a space station and we want to send astronauts to the space station. How can we do that? A spacecraft from Earth will have to dock with the space station, and only then will humans be able to go from the spacecraft into the space station. Okay, so think of it in that fashion. So the job of the SpaceX mission was basically to test that. Okay, so these two satellites, Chaser and Target, SpaceX mission launched through PSLV C60, and through it the POEM-4 was also conducted. Now this docking happened through the Bharatiya docking system. This is an indigenously developed system. Okay, now was the SpaceX mission successful? Yes, the SpaceX mission was successful, and India was able to demonstrate docking capabilities in space, thereby becoming only the 4th country in the world with space docking capability. Okay, only the 4th after Russia, USA, China. Okay, so India has become the 4th country with space docking capability. And though it was launched in December 2024. Why is it in the news for us? Because in Jan 2025, the space docking was actually achieved. Okay. So I hope this is clear. The SPADEX mission, one of the most important missions this year, possibly after Axiom 4. Okay. All right. So let's go on. Next, once again, some things that were in preparation for the ultimate Gaganyaan mission. Okay. So here we have this phrase, space analog experiments. Okay. So what are space analog experiments? The idea is to find places on Earth where some of the environment resembles the harsh environment of space. Right? Now, obviously, gravity will be something that will be there. That's something we cannot avoid. But the idea is in all other ways, we have to find places on Earth where circumstances or the environment is such that it would resemble the harsh conditions of space. Okay. And then experiments are done where humans go and stay in space-like modules in such places in order to mimic or to copy the environment of space. Okay, so that's the idea. Now, this year there were two important things related to this, Hope and Anugami. Okay, now first let me give you a bit of background. I've already told you that it's the Human Spaceflight Center at Bangalore which is responsible for implementing the Gaganyaan mission. Okay. Now, in 2024, we conducted the Ladakh Human Analog Mission. So keep this in mind. In India, Ladakh is one place which is able to mimic the conditions, the harsh conditions of space. Now, this year, point 3 and 4 is very important. Number one, there was the Anugami isolation study. Now, remember, we discussed the 4 Vyomnauts or Gagannauts whom India has chosen. So this year, Shubhanshu Shukla actually went into space in preparation on Axiom 4. And in the Anugami isolation study, Angad Pratap, one of the other proposed Vyomnauts, participated. Okay. Now here, this phrase is also reported in relation to the Anugami isolation study, that is GYAN-X or Gaganyaan analog experiments. Okay. It's a series of experiments. Once again, to expose the proposed Vyomnauts to the harsh conditions of space. Okay, so remember, the Anugami study is in order to prepare the astronauts for their ultimate space experience. Finally, number 4, we have the Hope space analog mission. So that is the Himalayan Outpost for Planetary Exploration. The Himalayan Outpost for Planetary Exploration space analog mission. So what do you have to know about this? You have to know that it took place at the Sokar Valley in Ladakh. Okay. So basically they developed a sort of habitat where the people could stay. Okay. And as I said, it would resemble the conditions of space. Now the objective of such experiments is also to make sure that the people are psychologically prepared, that they are prepared to eat the food which is provided, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the point of space analog experiments is simply to make sure that the proposed Vyomnauts are ready for their experience in space on board the Gaganyaan mission. So for this year, important Anugami isolation study and Hope, the Himalayan Outpost for Planetary Exploration. Okay, so these are two important missions from the perspective of space analog experiments. Okay, next, let's move on. Now, this is something that's still in the proposal stage as of now. That's the Bharatiya Antariksh Station. I say proposal stage just to indicate not that no work is being done on it, but it is still being prepared. Okay, there are no first steps which have occurred yet. Right, the research is ongoing on how to achieve this. So first remember, the objective is, right, The objective is to have the Bharatiya Antariksh Station operational by the year 2035. Okay, so the objective is to have the Bharatiya Antariksh Station ready in space by the year 2035. So not much for us to know about, but I thought through this, let's do other important space stations. So as of now, the important one is the International Space Station. So first remember, right now, there are only 2 space stations which are in orbit around the Earth. One is the International Space Station, which is 400 kilometers above the Earth in low Earth orbit. Okay. Now, it composes of multiple modules, right? So the first module was called Zarya, which was launched in 1998, but the various modules had been docked and completed by 2011. What is important here is that the International Space Station is near the end of its life. Okay, and so the idea is that the International Space Station will be retired by 2030. Okay, in fact, the International Space Station, why is it called international? Because it was a collaboration between 5 different space agencies. NASA, the European Space Agency, NASA, of course, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration of the US, the European Space Agency, which caters to a large group of European countries, the CSA, the Canadian Space Agency, JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, and Roscosmos, the space agency of the Russian Federation. Okay, so ISS is still in orbit, and the plan is to keep it in orbit till the year 2030. Okay, however, it is clearly reaching the end of its life, and so various other countries are planning their own space station. Okay, so what do we have to know beyond this? The other space station in orbit is from China. It's called Tiangong. Okay, it was launched a few years back. The first ever space station was again by USSR. It was called Salyut 1. Okay, India's is proposed, that's the Bharatiya Antariksh Station, and Russia also has a proposed space station called ROS, or the Russian Orbital Service Station. Okay, so this is the plan, okay, for the future. The first 2 represent the stations already in orbit. ISS planned for retirement in 2030. First ever was Salyut 1 of the USSR. The last 2 are the proposed space stations of India and Russia. Okay, so I think that covers the important news related to the space stations. Now, Bharatiya Antariksh Station has remained in the news, which is why I have mentioned it for you on this slide. Okay, let's now move on and quickly do the important space observances. Okay, so there are 3 I want you to cover. There are more. Okay, I have chosen not to cover International Moon Day and International Asteroid Day and so on and so forth. So we have 1 observance in India and 2 observances in the world. So in India, we have National Space Day, which was observed on the 23rd of August. Okay, and what does this date commemorate? It commemorates the soft landing at the Shiv Shakti point on the moon by the Vikram lander of Chandrayaan 3. Okay, so please keep this in mind. Shiv Shakti point is that spot where the soft landing occurred. Okay, that is important to remember. In relation to Chandrayaan 3, it was a moon mission. It had a lander called Vikram. It had a rover called Pragyan. Okay, and the spot where it landed has been named the Shiv Shakti point by the government of India. Okay, so that's about National Space Day. Next, we have actually one more thing, and this is something I want you to cover. there was a theme announced this year, and it was an acronym actually called Yantra. Okay, Yantra, which translates to device. Okay, so check out the theme of the National Space Day, YANTRA. Next, we have the International Day of Human Spaceflight, which is observed on the 12th of April, because the first ever human to go into space, Yuri Gagarin, went into space on 12th of April 1961. He was, of course, from the USSR. Most of the early achievements in space were made by USSR. In fact, the first woman in space was also from USSR. Her name was Valentina Tereshkova. Okay. In fact, beyond that, even the first successful artificial satellite was from the USSR. It was called Sputnik. We'll just see that in a moment. The next observance we should do is the World Space Week, which is observed from the 4th of October to the 10th of October. So not too far back, okay, from the perspective of current affairs. Why these two dates? Because on 4th October 1957, Sputnik 1 was successfully launched, which was the first successful artificial satellite of Earth. Okay. And on 10th October 1967, the Outer Space Treaty entered into force. The Outer Space Treaty is also popularly called the Magna Carta of space. So this is why World Space Week is observed between the 4th and the 10th of October each year. Okay, so these three observances I want you to keep in mind: the National Space Day related to Chandrayaan 3, the International Day of Human Spaceflight related to Yuri Gagarin, and the World Space Week related to Sputnik and the Outer Space Treaty. Okay, all right. Let's now move on to the next. So next we have the Proba 3 mission. Now this is important. This is significant because it's a collaboration between India and the European Space Agency. So this was a mission of the European Space Agency, which was launched by ISRO on PSLV C59. Okay. So what was the full form of Proba 3? That is something you have to know. It was the Project for On-Board Autonomy 3. What was its objective? The objective was to study the corona of the sun. The corona is considered the outermost layer of the sun. Finally, there are two parts of Proba 3, the occulter spacecraft and the coronagraph spacecraft. Very interestingly, these spacecrafts created an artificial solar eclipse in order to be able to properly study the corona of the sun. Okay, so the occulter spacecraft would cast a shadow, and that would give an opportunity to the coronagraph spacecraft to be able to image the sun's corona from within that shadow for an extended period. Okay. Finally, I want you to link two other things because they are both related to the sun, right? What are they? Number one, India's first and only solar mission as of now is Aditya L1. So that was launched earlier, not this year, but we should still know the name. What does this L stand for? L stands for Lagrange. Okay, the reference is to the Lagrange points. Okay, have a look at what they are. Okay, so Aditya L1 was India's first solar mission, the only one to study the sun. And this year, the NASA Punch mission was launched. So I want you to know the full form: polarimeter to unify the corona and the heliosphere. Okay, polarimeter to unify the corona and the heliosphere. Okay, so the Proba 3 mission of the European Space Agency, launched by ISRO, PSLV C59, coronagraph spacecraft and occulter spacecraft, artificial solar eclipse, India's solar mission, Aditya L1, NASA's solar mission, launched this year. punch, polarimeter to unify the corona and the heliosphere. Okay, so I just wanted to put together the space related missions on one slide. So I hope this is absolutely clear. Let's now move on to the next. This is an important one, NISAR. Okay, the NASA ISRO synthetic aperture radar. Okay, that's the full form. As you can see, it's a joint collaboration of NASA and ISRO, and the instrument it is carrying is the synthetic aperture radar. Now, what has happened is there are two different kinds of synthetic aperture radar. The L-band synthetic aperture radar is being provided by NASA, and the S-band synthetic aperture radar is being provided by ISRO. Okay. In fact, NISAR was launched this year by ISRO once again on board GSLV F-60. Now, what is it? It's an Earth observation satellite. It has important applications related to climate change as well. And importantly, glaciers are an important topic this year. And this is going to be good, and it's going to be apt for analyzing the extent of reduction of glaciers on Earth. Okay. It is planned to live for 5 years in space. So that's basically it. NISAR, very important collaboration of NASA and ISRO. Perfect. Let's now go to the next. Now, this was a news which said India's heaviest communication satellite till date launched. Okay, so India launched its heaviest communication satellite till date on the 2nd of November 2025. So very recently. What is the name of the satellite? GSAT-7R or CMS-03. Either of those names. What is important is this is actually a satellite which was launched for the Indian Navy. I know we have a defense session planned, but I want you all to quickly look up, if you don't know, the current admiral of the Indian Navy. Okay. Finally, how was it launched? It was launched on board the LVM-3 M5. Okay. So India launched its heaviest communication satellite called GSAT-7R, also known as CMS-03, in 2025. For which branch of the military? The Indian Navy. Okay. So I hope this is clear. Let's now proceed to the next one. This was related to India's 100th launch. Okay. 100th space launch, basically. Where did it happen from? Once again, the Satish Dhawan Space Center at Sriharikota, Andhra Pradesh. So what was launched? It was NVS-02. So the name of the satellite is NVS-02 on board the GSLV F-50. Now what you have to keep in mind, it is the second satellite of the IRNSS or the Indian Regional Navigation Satellite System. Okay. This operationally is called NAVIC or Navigation with Indian Constellation. So think of it as the Indian equivalent of the GPS, the Global Positioning System, right? Which is able to run because of the advancements made by NASA in the United States. Okay. So this actually was India's 100th launch. It was not entirely successful. Okay. So please keep that in mind. The 100th launch happened a little bit early in the year. Okay. I think in the first 3 months or so. The point is the name of the satellite, the name of the launch vehicle. It is part of IRNSS. You need to know the full form, the Indian Regional Navigation Satellite System. And officially, the application is called NAVIC, Navigation with Indian Constellation. NAVIC, equivalent of the US GPS. Okay. Let's now go to the last slide. Okay. So this deals with miscellany in space this year. So what I've done is simply mentioned 5 or 6 other relevant missions which were launched or news items which came up relating to the topic of space in 2025. Okay. Now Vikram 3201 we have covered previously. The first fully indigenous 32-bit space grade microprocessor. which was unveiled actually at Semicon 2025. Okay. Then NASA had a mission called Escapade, right, which is specifically for Mars, the Escape and Plasma Acceleration and Dynamics Explorers. Then China launched the Tianwen-2, which was basically to explore the near-Earth asteroid called Kamo-Oalewa. Okay, and the purpose is actually to land, collect samples, and come back. By the way, this object, this near-Earth asteroid, is the one which has been called India's quasi-satellite this year. If you saw news reports, this is the object that we are talking about. Next, NASA launched a mission called IMAP, the Interstellar Mapping and Acceleration Probe. This is again to study the boundary of the heliosphere. Think of it, heliosphere, the bubble created by the sun. Second last, we have NASA Tracers, or the Tandem Reconnection and Composition Explorer spacecraft. Okay, so this is specifically to better understand space weather. And the last one, very interestingly, it's the NASA Lucy mission. This was not launched this year. This was launched several years ago, but it conducted a flyby of this asteroid called Donald Johanson. So this came up in the news. While Lucy, for the longest time, it was thought that the earliest fossil we discovered of a human-related species was Lucy. Okay, Lucy is a name given, of course, to a particular fossil discovered, considered to be the oldest known human species fossil. Okay, of course, later older fossils have been discovered, but in honor of that, NASA had named its mission Lucy, because the idea was that Lucy would be able to land on the, not land actually, Lucy would be able to explore the Trojan asteroids around Jupiter, and this would give us a lot of insight into the beginnings of the solar system and the universe. Okay, so this year it conducted a flyby of the asteroid Donald Johanson. It's still on its way to the Trojan asteroids near Jupiter. Okay, all right. So that covers our miscellaneous topics related to space. So today we've had a very broad coverage. We've done ISRO, the important missions, NISAR, the heaviest satellite, India's 100th launch, Proba, Bharatiya Antariksh Station, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I hope you've now gained a bunch of clarity related to the space news of 2025. We'll keep coming back to you. So this week we also have planned detailed sessions on defense-related news and defense-related topics. We have a session planned on Israel and Palestine, and a detailed session relating to all the environmental news of this year. Okay, so stay tuned. Please do subscribe to our channel, CLAT Possible. It was lovely to meet you all this evening, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all again. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Good night.